Tragedy is something that affects all of us. Although it comes wearing many different faces, the impact of loss and heartbreak is a burden we all bear. A 2012 CNN report reveals evidence that suggests tragedy has a physical impact on the brain. The function of the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus are all less efficient in the wake of a traumatic event, especially when repeatedly exposed to graphic recounts and constant news coverage. The report suggests, instead, that time to heal in the absence of the 24-hour onslaught of news coverage is most conducive to a healthier mindset. Traditionally, post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychological impacts of trauma are thought to afflict only those immediately impacted by a major event. However, more recently, it has been suggested that even onlookers, first responders, and those who have heard graphic recounts of such events may experience negative psychological side effects. Recently, the harrowing effects of PTSD can be observed in the victims of the Parkland shooting. One student recounts the panic that ensued after hearing a wooden chair leg strike the floor at a funeral of one of her peers. Even sounds thought to be daily occurrences can have detrimental effects on those afflicted. Car horns, shut doors, popping balloons, any of these may trigger an awful bout of panic for a PTSD sufferer. For many, mental illnesses like these are the price of tragedy.
In Braving the Wilderness by Brene Barnes, she says that's why in moments of real joy, many of us dress rehearse tragedy. We see our child leave for the prom and all we can think is car crash. We get excited about an upcoming vacation and we start thinking hurricane. We try to beat vulnerability to the punch by imagining the worst or by feeling nothing in hopes that the other shoe won't drop. I call it foreboding joy. I think oftentimes we think about things such as when Brene Barnes says our child leaves for prom and we think car crash. It's for us to kind of rehearse that in our mind so if it does happen, we are less vulnerable to it. And that's the sad part about tragedy, is that we do, in a sense, want to think about it all the time. We don't actually want it to happen, but when it does, we feel like we are a little bit more immune to it when it does happen.
So basically, my junior year of high school, I had a good friend of mine at tennis practice. She had a pre-existing heart condition, and during a practice, she just dropped, and basically by the time the ambulance got there, she was declared dead.
Do you think there's any overt ways that it has changed the way you act and think as a person, or is it more of kind of a thing that has happened to you, but you don't feel that there is a very overt change in your life?
I mean, I've always taken everyone very seriously. Definitely life is probably the most greatest gift anyone's ever got. And it sucks, when anyone loses that. Has it made me value life more? Yeah.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's what I would imagine would be the result. Do you think that had you not undergone that experience, it would be more difficult to experience loss in the future? Do you think that you are better able to handle loss having handled it once? Or do you think it's one of those things that, when it happens, obviously it is devastating and it's a very difficult thing to deal with, but because you have this newfound appreciation for other people's lives, it might help you more easily, not compartmentalize, but process these things in the future?
Yes, I do think so. It kind of, I think it shelters you basically for future and death. Granted, I was really close with this person and that was out of nowhere. I think it really just has to do with your relationship with that person. I do think that it having one loss in the future or in the past
changes the way you think about it in the future.
It's still, I think it has to do with the relationship.
I agree with you, because when you lose a grandparent, which obviously I've gone through, you kind of know. It's kind of a part of your life. It's a stage of life. People lose their parents as they grow up. People lose their grandparents as they grow up, and it's to be expected. But when something so unexpected like that happens, it's difficult to deal with. It's difficult to process.
Birthdays are a year and 7 months apart, so in December he'd be 2 years older, and when May rolled around he'd be only 1. I can remember him always fighting my battles for me, literally going as far as to pull a clump of hair from another little boy's head who had upset me in some childish manner. As we aged, we grew apart rather than together. Little sisters became less cool, and he began experimenting with recreational drugs. Marijuana, to uppers, to Xanax, and then eventually to meth. My parents doted on him, spending all of their energy trying to make him better, while simultaneously ignoring their other children. Logan had eventually had all his teeth removed and were forced to get dentures, which my parents funded over my college education. I grew resentful and embarrassed. I wanted my brother to recover from his addiction, but my own judgment held him at arm's length. After 10 days clean, we started talking again. I was so proud of him. At 90 days, we were sharing music recommendations, and I was starting to realize that he hadn't wanted to push me away, and that I had been in fact the problem. My brother idolized me in any way and cared about my opinion on everything. He made it to 120 days clean and serene, but then he relapsed. I remember seeing him the morning after he had tried to admit himself into 3 hospitals and had gotten turned away at every door. I told him it was going to be okay. It was the perfect time for a hug. I didn't hug him. About 6 hours later, my mother found him dead in the apartment he rented out. I miss my brother every single day, but I learned from that not to judge anyone, because it's the person that matters more than the actions. I'll never get to see my brother again, and I wasted so many years when he was just down the way. I don't know, it might be too early to tell exactly how it has impacted me. I think I'm more thoughtful. I feel like I have represented him, and I need to create some sort of legacy for him since he isn't around to do it for himself. I try to be more helpful and gentler when I can be. I say what I feel more freely. It's an experience that definitely has made me more aware of my own mortality.
This story is about Sarah's ex-boyfriend, Nicholas. When I think of tragedy, I think about my heartbreak from 2 years ago. We constantly fought, eventually leading to him having enough and breaking up with me. It really came out of nowhere, where I spent weeks fighting for him, trying to prove that things would be different. A month later, he got into a relationship. This tragedy hurt me so much because I realized that I completely took him for granted when I had him, and it took losing him to realize that. From this heartbreak, I realized that I need to appreciate everyone who's in my life and never to take them for granted. I also learned a lot about my own self-worth, that I need to learn how to be more vulnerable and not scared of being hurt. Being hurt for the most part is inevitable in life, but as I've learned from personal reflection, it's better to completely put yourself out there instead of being scared and holding back. For the most part, I truly believe that this tragedy was a result of my own fault of being scared, and I've truly learned that I will never allow this to happen again, and I will never take anyone for granted and be scared.
In Brene Barnes' Braving the Wilderness, she talks about the tragedy of Sandy Hook, and she ends that passage with, "Today there's a sign that welcomes you to Newtown. We are Sandy Hook. We choose love. That day when I sat in a room with other mothers from my neighborhood and cried, I wasn't sure what we were doing or why. Today, I'm pretty sure we're choosing love in our own small way." Tragedy, of course, is tragic, but it has a way of bringing us together. Barnes says that these collective joy and pain experiences are sacred. They're so deeply human, and they cut through our differences and tap into our hardwired nature. These experiences tell us what is true and possible about the human spirit. We need these moments with strangers as reminders that despite how much we might dislike someone on Facebook or even in person, we are inextricably connected. And it doesn't have to be a big moment with thousands of strangers. We can be reminded of our connection after talking with a seatmate on a 2-hour flight. But the problem is that we don't often always show up for enough of these experiences, and it's only when tragedy is placed in our face, it's when we clearly need them and use them.